Today's game is played in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, in the 1959 Canis Chess Tournament. It was played between Grandmasters Mikhail Tal and Bobby Fischer. Tal starts off with 1 d4. Fischer responds with knight f6. Then we have c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, bishop e2, castles, knight to f3. Now Fischer is playing the King's Indian defense, Petrosian variation. e5, Fischer is careful not to allow Tal to have too much central space. d5, knight b, d7, bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, a6, castles, queen e8, knight to d2, knight a7, and Fischer's play is quite logical. The main idea for black is to play f5 and attack on the king's side, and the main idea for white is to expand and attack on the queen's side. Therefore we see b4, but then bishop s6, and Fischer plays this and loses a great deal of time, as well as a really good attacking piece. Knight hf6, the knight moves again, and Fischer still has not developed the light-squared bishop, and also the rook. Knight b3, queen e7, queen d2, king h7, queen out to e3, and knight to g8, and Fischer has made many minor mistakes that all add up. He has moved his pieces too many times, losing tempos, and has neglected to develop his remaining bishop and rook. Therefore, any attack that Fischer has will fizzle out, and any attack that Tal has will prove quite difficult to stop. c5, f5, e takes f5, g takes f5, f4, e takes f4, and queen takes f4. Tal sacrifices a pawn in order to attack. D takes c5, and Fischer goes for it. Now, what Fischer probably should have done here is played knight out to e5. It is more logical since it would allow Fischer to complete his development, and the knight is very good on e5. Instead, though, we see d takes e5, bishop d3, Tal ignores the pawn and goes for his opponent's king. C takes b4, rook a to e1, queen f6, and now we have rook out to e6. And Tal sacrifices a piece, his knight, in order to draw the queen farther away from the king. Bishop takes on f5 check. And here, there's a couple of different variations. Yeah, in the actual game, rook takes f5 was played. But let's take a look at king out to h8. This leads to a very quick checkmate, rook check. Knight takes, queen check, and queen h7 checkmate. Now here, if instead of king out to h8, what about king to g7? Then we have rook check, king f7, queen to e4, simply to cut off the king from the e file. Knight d to f6. Now what about rook to e8 instead? Then we would have bishop takes d7, check, with the rook, knight to f6, and then queen takes e8, checkmate. And the knight can't take the queen because the rook is pinning it to the king. So that would be a quick checkmate. Therefore knight d to f6 must be tried. And then simply bishop takes, c8, check. Well, actually, this is not a check. The rook is simply pinning the knight to the king. So here, how should black respond? Yeah, if black were to play rook out to e8, then simply bishop to e6 is check, king e7, queen f4. And the idea is to take on c7, play rook out to c1 first to drive the queen away, then take on c7 in order to have checkmate, or at least win a lot of material. So here if king to d8, then simply rook to c1, if queen b2, then we have a checkmate. If the queen doesn't move, then black is going to lose a lot of material. Now here if c6, then simply queen to c7, leads to a very quick checkmate. And yeah, the knight can't take the rook once again, because it is pinned to the king. So what about rook a to c8 instead? Well then simply rook out to c1 once again, queen b2, and here white could play rook out to g7, check. And there's this really cool idea. If king to d8, then simply queen to d6 check, the queen must be captured, and then rook out to c8, checkmate. Isn't that just really awesome? That's a huge, awesome queen sacrifice. And then of course here, instead of king to d8, if king f8, then rook f7, is a checkmate in one. Alright, so instead of this variation, Yeah, okay, where were we at? Yeah, we looked at rook out to e8, saw that bishop e6, king e7, and queen f4 idea. Doesn't work. What about rook 8 takes on c8? Then we have rook out to g4, and this seems like a silly move. But the idea is to move the rook out of the way to allow queen to h7, leading to a checkmate. So here, if black were to play rook on cd8, then simply queen h7 is a checkmate in one. Yeah, the knight can't take it because it's pinned, so that's very awesome. And if rook f to e8, in order to give the king the escape square on f8, well, that doesn't work out either. Yeah, just simply check once again, the queen can't be captured, and then rook takes on g8. And that's checkmate, the rook cannot be captured. Alrighty, so that is that variation, which is why king to g7 and king to h8 are not played. And the actual game rook takes on f5 is tried, but it also doesn't work out too well. Now here, if king h8, that's the best move. We're going to look at that in a minute. If king out to g7 is played, then we have queen f7 check, king h8, and rook to g6. And now there's a possible checkmate on g7 if the queen were to move away from the defensive g7, and there's also a checkmate on g8, and both checkmates cannot be defended. Yeah, if simply knight g to f6 in order to have the knights defend each other, then this checkmate happens. And if the knight were to move out to this square to try and defend against this checkmate and that checkmate, well, then there follows a third checkmate. Rook takes h6, so there's really no way to escape that. Okay, so king to h8 was tried, then we have rook out to f3, queen b2, rook to e8, pinning the knight to the king, setting up possible checkmate ideas. Therefore, black forces the issue knight d6, forces a queen to take the knight because the bishop is attacking it, and at this point, Tal goes into the endgame, simply up by a pawn. Yeah, Mikhail Tal has a rook for a bishop and a pawn, and is therefore up by one pawn plus. It has this knight pinned, has ideas of rook out to g6 or rook to f8, and pinning the knight even more, so therefore king out to g7 is played. And now there's this threat of taking the knight or taking the bishop, so therefore knight to e7 is forced. I can't take the knight because the rook on f8 would be hanging, but it makes it very difficult for black to complete development. Yeah. Then we have b5, knight to e5, and here Fischer resigned. All of his pieces are tied up. If the rook were to move off of the 8th rank, then he loses material. For example, if rook to b6, then simply rook takes c8, white is up by a piece. And if the bishop moves, then the rook is lost. If the knight moves, then the bishop's lost. And if black simply plays a5 to try and avoid losing any material, then because of the knight on e5, there's this rook f7 check, and then leads to a checkmate in just a few moves. So that is really awesome. A great attacking game by the legendary Grandmaster Mikhail Tal.